Hey, how's it going, folks? Welcome to the third instalment of the Master and Margarita. So we are looking today at chapters 10 to 14, and obviously this is the podcast version I'm recording here, which will also be going out as a video. It might be unlinked, it will be unlinked to begin with, so you'll be able to view it as an embed in my Substack essay, which you'll get over at camscampbellreads.substack.com, where you can subscribe in order to receive my weekly updates into your inbox. I may well make these public going forward because I haven't managed to get up the hill of beans this week, which means I've not been recording my daily walking talks up there as I go through each chapter, which kind of bums me out a bit, but it's just life's been lifing, and the weather's been atrocious as well. So I'm just going to read out my essay for you, and if you want to read it yourself, of course you can do that. I'm going to put it out also as a printable essay without all the images and stuff. So if you want to be offline and sit in your comfy chair and read it, you can do that as well. So here we go. I hope you enjoyed this week's instalment. I haven't managed a hike this week, so there are no updates recorded in the forestry. That's kind of a downer, but the weather's been horrible and life has stolen days from me with its life stuff. I've managed to keep up with this project by letting others slide. That's my commitment to you. So, to the book. Follow me, reader. Za mной, читатель. Chapter 10. News from Yalta. We're at the theatre with Rimsky, the financial director, or fin director, and Varinucha, the theatre manager. So I've got a footnote there on fin director to talk about how this is one of those types of contractions that the Soviets loved, and it's used as an example in one of the academic essays I read about the translations. It's a comparison of 6 translations. It's by Natalie Vidko, and there's a footnote with a link that you can go and read that essay, because you might remember I did say I was going to try and not go in too deeply into translation issues in my essays here, because that might just be something that's of interest to me, given that I was a translator for a long time. So there is a link to that. It's an article available on JSTOR, which is an academic repository, and you can get a free trial to that if you want to read articles on there. Right. Varinucha is avoiding everyone who is looking for complimentary tickets. Playbills for the Black Magic show are delivered. It transpires that neither Rimsky nor Varinucha have actually met Voland. Stepan Likhadyev, Styopa, the theatre director, had called at 11 a.m. to say that he would be at the theatre in the next half hour. You will recall that phone call's being made after Styopa is rudely awakened by Voland in his flat. They receive a telegram at the theatre. Whose variety? Super lightning for you. Signature? And super lightning is another example that Natalie Vidko has used in her translation analysis, where she's looking between 6 different translations, and this is of particular interest to her. So again, you can check that article out if you want to read that. I'll put a link in the description as well to this video. The telegram purports to be from Styopa, letting them know he's in Yalta. If you're reading the Applin translation, the telegram opens with, Yalta, Moscow, Variety, today, 11:30, appeared CID. I had to look up the Burgeon O'Connor to learn that CID stands for Criminal Investigation Department. I wonder why that wasn't in the Applin. A false Dmitri, Varinucha said. And then we've got footnotes to explain. A false Dmitri, Grigory Tierpiev became the figurehead for the opposition to the rule of Boris Godunov in 1604, when he claimed to be Dmitry, a son of Ivan the Terrible, believed to have died in 1591. He was hailed as Tsar after Godunov's death in 1605, but was deposed and killed the following year. So thank you, Applin, for that footnote. They receive another telegram confirming that Voland had sent Stjopa to Yalta by hypnosis. Naturally, the two are bewildered and don't believe it. For one thing, it wouldn't have been possible to get to Yalta in such a short amount of time. They call Stjopa's flat, and as the phone is ringing, they hear a grave, gloomy voice singing, "The cliffs, my refuge." So here's another footnote from Applin. "The cliffs, my refuge" is a line from Aufenthalt by Schubert, 1797 to 1828, from his Schwanengesang cycle. The words were written by the poet Ludwig Rellstab, 1799 to 1860. So, Schwanengesang, my German's atrocious, is swan song in English. It was published after Schubert's death, so it could be interpreted here as a voice from beyond. Stjopa's flat is now a gateway to another plane, and the caller had better beware. It's not a new idea, but I'm tickled to have seen this idea used so well in Season 4 of Stranger Things, which I just recently rewatched and really enjoyed. That's twice that series has come up for me in this reading of the Master and Margarita. And I've got an image here of one of the gateways from Stranger Things, Season 4, Episode 3, The Monster and the Superhero. Another telegram arrives. This is a photogram featuring Stjopa's signature, confirming the telegram's provenance. Stjopa is requesting that they set up surveillance on Voland. Quote, "Varianocha did all the things a man is supposed to do at moments of great astonishment. He ran around the office. He twice raised his arms like a man being crucified. He drank a whole glass of yellowish water from the carafe, and he exclaimed, 'I don't understand, I don't understand, I do not understand.' I'll discuss the colour yellow a bit more later. Why Yalta? Why did Voland send Stjopa to Yalta and not Siberia or overseas, or simply have him disappear? Yalta is a city in the Crimea, a place of rest and relaxation. Its temperate climate makes it ideal for spas and resorts, which is why it is such a popular location for politicians and celebrities' summer homes, as well as just regular holidays. I often kick myself for not having gone during my year in Odessa in the 90s. Stjopa's being in Yalta feels legitimate, notwithstanding the impossibility of his getting there and the suddenness of his departure. Respectable enough to discourage questions and a legitimate place to relax. Rimsky tries to place a call to Yalta, but the line's out of order. He calls the telegram office to send a super lightning back, letting them know that he'd spoken to Stjopa in Moscow 10 minutes before Stjopa sent the telegram from Yalta, and that they will arrange surveillance on Voland. Rimsky bundles the telegrams into an envelope, seals it, and gives it to Varianocha to deliver personally. Varianocha puts it in his briefcase. I have a feeling it's going to disappear, don't you? Varianocha reaches Stjopa's flat by phone and speaks to Karoviev. Varianocha asks for Stjopa, only to be told that he's gone for a drive in the country. It dawns on Varianocha that there's a cafe not far away called Yalta, so they conclude that Stjopa went there, got drunk, and sent the telegrams from the cafe as a prank. Mystery solved. Another telegram arrives from Stjopa requesting 500 rubles to make his way back to Moscow. Rimsky agrees to it, believing that he'll get it back, and then sends Varianocha to deliver the package of telegrams to an undisclosed location. Just as he's putting on his cap to leave, he gets a phone call. It's a voice warning him not to take the telegrams anywhere or show them to anyone. This riles him and makes him all the more determined to bring these pranksters to justice. Quote, "The manager was excited and full of energy. After the insolent telephone call, he was in no doubt that a band of hooligans was playing dirty tricks, and that these tricks were connected to Likudieva's disappearance. A desire to expose the villains was choking the manager, and, strange as it might seem, there arose in him a sense of anticipation of something pleasant. This can happen when a man seeks to become the centre of attention, to bear some sensational piece of news." End quote. As he heads out, he feels a strong urge to check that the maintenance department has replaced the bulb in the public convenience. He goes in to check as a storm is building up outside. Inside, he meets a short, fat man with the physiognomy of a cat, who claps Varinucha on the ear so hard that his cap falls into a toilet bowl. Another man appears, it's Azazello, and claps him on the other ear. The two carry him off through the storm and into Stiopa's flat, where he meets, quote, "a completely naked girl, red-haired, with burning phosphorescent eyes," end quote. She gives him a kiss and he faints into blackness. It's kind of the opposite of the Prince and the Sleeping Beauty, isn't it? The Russian edition I have has a footnote over this character which translates as follows, quote, "Voland's made a somewhat decorative figure who enhances the convincing plasticity of the fantastical scenes but does not play a role in the conflict," brackets, which is why the author seems to have forgotten about her. She's not among Voland's retinue in the last chapter, close brackets. The crimson scar on her neck testifies to her violent death and recalls the image of Goethe's Gretchen, who appeared to Faust on Walpurgis Night. End quote. It's Hela, though she's not yet named. Chapter 11. Ivan splits in two. We're back at the clinic. There's a wood on the opposite bank of the river. The thunderstorm has reached the clinic too, so it's not just localised to where Varinucha was. The wind has blown in through the window and scattered Biezdomny's papers all over the floor. At the doctor's request, he has been writing his account of the night before, and he's got himself into a tangle of words. I wonder just how biographical this description of his writing the story might be. I can imagine Bulgakov himself getting into a fankle with the story's multiple narratives. Is it just me? Maybe. And I've got an image here of Ivan being given the sedative by artist Vladislav Pantelkin. The nurse enters and sees that Biezdomny is agitated. She gathers up his papers and calls for the doctor, who arrives soon after and gives Biezdomny a sedative. This has the desired effect, and Biezdomny finds himself wondering just what it was that he'd got so worked up about. He questions the whole situation, whereupon we get this line, quote, but, the former Ivan said sternly from somewhere to the new Ivan, perhaps inside, perhaps right by his ear. He did, after all, know in advance that Berlioz's head was going to be cut off, didn't he? How could you not get agitated? End quote. So we have the former Ivan, the one who was freaked out by the previous day's events, and this new Ivan, who seems okay with it all and is unperturbed. In fact, he seems positively excited by it and wonders why the former Ivan hadn't thought to ask what happened afterwards to Pilate and Hanosri. He thinks to himself of Berlioz, quote, "Man is mortal, and, as was rightly said, suddenly mortal," end quote. As he wakes up from a doze, the new Ivan asks the old, quote, "So, what do I turn out to be in that case?" And then a voice is heard to say, "A fool." As he's falling asleep, a mysterious figure appears on the balcony and wags his finger at Ivan, whispering, "Shh." Any guesses as to who this might be? Chapter 12, Black Magic and its Exposure. We're at the Variety Theatre. Rimsky is fretting about the disappearance of Varinucha. He means to call the location he'd sent him to, but discovers the phone lines are down. He gets a message that Voland has arrived during the interval of that night's performance. He goes down to greet him and is surprised to see his assistants, none other than Koroviev and the Black Cat Behemoth. They perform a magic trick on Rimsky. Koroviev pulls Rimsky's pocket watch from behind Behemoth's ear. Then the cat walks over, on his back legs, to pour himself a glass of water from the carafe. The alarm goes for the next act to start, and we meet the compere, George Bengalski. He introduces Voland after making a rather poor joke. A translation point of interest. On stage, Voland addresses Koroviev as a fagot, from the Russian fagot, meaning bassoon. Bulgakov is clearly enjoying himself here, though much of the joke is lost in translation. We already have 3 characters named after composers, Berlioz, Rimsky and Stravinsky, yet none of them are composing anything. Berlioz is dead, and neither Rimsky nor Stravinsky drives the narrative. Koroviev, by contrast, Mr. Bassoon, does. He is not a composer, but an instrument, the one that makes the audience laugh. Voland conducts, Koroviev plays. In orchestral writing, the bassoon is often used as a mocking, chattering voice, capable of comedy. Its power lies not in brute force, but in performance, misdirection and moral exposure. I asked my daughter, a senior horn player at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, with a bassoonist boyfriend at the Royal Academy of Music, and she immediately cited The Sorcerer's Apprentice as a classic example of this role of the bassoon. She also pointed out this piece where the bassoon is explicitly marked to be played, quote, drunkenly. And it's a link to Tam O'Shanter Overture by Sir Malcolm Arnold on YouTube. Voland takes to the stage and discusses with Koroviev how the inhabitants of Moscow have changed. The compere tells the audience that Voland is simply expressing his admiration of the city, but Voland calls him out as a liar. The most important question for Voland is whether the inhabitants of Moscow have changed inwardly. That implies that he's known them before. They perform a magic trick involving a pack of cards. Then they get on to money, making 10-ruble notes rain down into the audience. Pandemonium ensues. I have a feeling that this is a test to see whether Moscow's inhabitants have changed inwardly, and they haven't. The compere tells the audience that this is an impressive example of mass hypnosis and that the banknotes will disappear as quickly as they appeared. But they don't. Koroviev fagot calls him a liar once again and expresses his annoyance at these constant interruptions. He asks the audience what should be done with them. "Rip off his head," someone said sternly from the gallery. Voland. "Well," the latter replied pensively, "they're the same as any other people. They like money, but that was always the case, you know. Mankind likes money, no matter what it might be made of, whether of leather, whether of paper, of bronze or gold. So they're frivolous, well, and mercy sometimes knocks at their hearts. Ordinary people. All in all, they're just reminiscent of the previous ones. It's just the housing question that's ruined them." And in a loud voice, he ordered, "Put the head back on." I've got an image here by artist Mirso Katasanu of the compere's head being held up by Behemoth the cat. Such a great piece of art. The compere has his head put back on and he's taken off to see a doctor. Meanwhile, the show has ramped up into the realms of the fantastical. The auditorium is turned into a boutique, and all kinds of fashionable clothing and luxury goods are on hand, purveyed by a red-haired girl in a black evening dress who had appeared from the devil knows where. This is Hela, as yet unnamed, making her second appearance in the novel. Fagot announces that all the women may exchange their dowdy Moscow clothing for the latest in Parisian fashion. After a brunette goes first, chaos ensues as the women rush the stage to take part in the offer. When Fagot later announced that the shop would be closed until the next evening in exactly 1 minute, it went crazy and the women were grabbing everything they could before it was too late. Quote, "A pleasant, sonorous and very insistent baritone was heard from box number 2. It is none the less desirable, citizen artiste, that you should without delay expose before the audience the technique of your tricks, in particular the trick with the banknotes. Also desirable is the return of the compere to the stage. His fate is worrying the audience. The baritone belonged to none other than the evening's guest of honour, Arkady Apollonovich Sempleyarov, the chairman of the Acoustics Commission of Moscow Theatres. End quote. Fagot exposes Sempleyarov for having spent 4 hours at an actress's apartment rather than at the meeting he'd told his wife he was going to. Naturally, Sempleyarov's wife does not take too kindly to this exposure. Behemoth then calls out from the front of the stage that the show is over and instructs the band to saw out a march. The magicians disappear. Chapter 13, The Coming of the Hero. I've got some artwork here from Yevgeny Grichin which shows the character we're just about to discuss, the Master, with a bunch of stolen keys. We're back with Ivan and the stranger on his balcony. That's Ivan Bezdomny. The stranger is wearing hospital clothes. He has a bunch of keys he stole from Praskovya Fyodorovna, but he can't escape because he has nowhere to go. He tells Bezdomny that he doesn't like his poetry despite having never read any, and Bezdomny admits that his poems are monstrous. He swears to stop writing poetry. Bezdomny then goes on to tell his story to the stranger, and when he gets to the pilot part of the story, the stranger responds, quote, "The guest then put his hands together in prayer and whispered, 'Oh, I got it so right. Oh, I got it all so right.'" End quote. On finishing his story, the stranger tells Bezdomny that he got off lightly. The man he met at Patriarch's Ponds was none other than Satan himself. He questions Bezdomny as to whether he's even heard the opera Faust. The stranger names the Faustian character as Voland, whereupon Bezdomny slapped his head and began to croak. I see. He had the letter W on his visiting card." The moon is invoked in this scene as the clouds float by. After peering at the moon, Bezdomny exclaims, "And they call me a madman." And when the stranger says, "Let's look truth in the eye," he looks straight at the moon, which the narrator calls the nocturnal heavenly body. It marks the moment when Bezdomny's understanding aligns with reality. The moon illuminates what can't be said in the light of day. The truth is nocturnal. Keep your eyes peeled for other places when the moon appears throughout the novel, both in Moscow and in Yerushalayim. Quote, "But I mean, he'll get up to the devil knows what here. Mustn't he be caught somehow?" Inside the new Ivan, the former Ivan did after all raise his head, not entirely confidently, but not yet finally done for. End quote. Could one Ivan be nocturnal? It's such a fascinating concept. The stranger responds that they're both madmen, but goes on to tell Bezdomny that what happened to him actually happened in reality. The lines are getting crossed. The stranger expresses sadness that it was Bezdomny and not he who encountered Voland. He goes on to explain that he is also in the clinic because of Pontius Pilate. He's a writer and a year ago wrote a novel about him. So that will refer back to his quote where he said, "I got it all so right." "You're a writer?" asked the poet with interest. The guest's face darkened and he shook his fist at Ivan and then said, "I'm the master." At last, we have one of the titular characters. He puts on his black silk hat with the letter M embroidered on it in yellow. "She made it for me with her own hands," he added mysteriously. I think we can happily assume that he's referring to Margarita, though she's not named. He goes on to tell Bezdomny about his background, stating that he no longer has a name because he has rejected it. Later, he mentions having won 100,000 rubles in a state bond. This was a financial vehicle of the Soviet state, similar to NS&I premium bonds in the UK, National Savings and Investment. The state borrowed money by issuing bonds with low or no interest payable that acted like lottery tickets. If your number was printed in the paper, you could win a large cash prize. The Master then tells a story that I'm sure will warm all of your cockles about his 2 rooms in the basement with a warm stove and books all around him and nobody to bother him. Sounds idyllic, doesn't it? This is where he writes his pilot story, stating even that he knew what the last words of his novel would be. Curious readers may feel inclined to flip to the end of the book to see what the last words of the novel will be. I don't condone such behaviour, but I promise not to judge. I may well have just had a wee peek myself. The Master goes on to describe the first time he met her as he gazes at the moon. Do I just call her Margarita at this point? Even though the novel hasn't named her, I think I will. We all know, right? Quote, she was carrying some disgusting, alarming yellow flowers in her hands. The devil knows what they're called, but for some reason they're the first to appear in Moscow. And then I've got an image here, photographic image by photographer Jean-Daniel Lariot, which includes the quote, she was carrying some disgusting, alarming yellow flowers in her hands, etc. There's a link to the source as well. This guy's done a load of excellent photographs, so I will be including more, I'm quite sure, as I continue writing up these essays. These flowers would almost certainly have been mimosa. Why might the Master consider them disgusting or alarming? He goes on to say that yellow is, quote, not a good colour, end quote. ChatGPT says that yellow signals sickness, moral corruption and disturbance. They appear too early and look unnatural. I'm not sure I agree, but there must be some significance as the colour is mentioned repeatedly in the novel, 28 times in the Applin translation. The letter M on the Master's black hat is embroidered in yellow silk. Margarita made it for him. It appears to be a margarita colour. Quote, and just imagine suddenly it was she who spoke. Do you like my flowers? I remember distinctly the way her voice sounded, quite low but with breaks in it, and however silly, there seemed to be an echo in the side street and it reverberated off the dirty yellow wall. I quickly crossed over to her side and, going up to her, replied, no. End quote. The truth. This really jumped out at me, as I'm not sure I would have been as truthful at that moment. This feels important as we get to know the Master. In the ensuing conversation, he tells her he likes roses, and she throws her yellow flowers into the gutter. It almost feels like she was testing him and he's passed. This feels like a love of the ages, a love that goes beyond the physical world. The Master realised he'd loved her all his life, while she, quote, subsequently claimed that it wasn't like that we had of course loved one another for ever such a long time without knowing and never seeing one another, and that she had lived with another man, end quote. And then I've got some art here again from Yevgeny Grichin, with Margarita reading the Master's novel in the basement flat on Arbat Street. And we're just about to head there in the essay. They become inseparable, and the Master writes his book in the idyllic setting of his 2 rooms, completely shut off from the outside world, until the novel is finished in August and typed up in 5 copies. Then, quote, finally came the hour when it was necessary to abandon the secret refuge and emerge into life. And I emerged into life, holding it in my hands, and then my life ended, the Master whispered, and hung his head, and it was a long time that the sad black hat with the yellow letter M shook. End quote. He takes his completed manuscript to an editor, and it doesn't go well. We get the clash between the artist and the business world. Sound familiar? Quote, What do I remember after that? Muttered the master, rubbing his temples. Yes, fallen red petals on the title page, and also my girl's eyes. Yes, I remember those eyes. End quote. So, the red petals, I'm assuming the rose petals. Both the Master and Margarita have expressed a love for these flowers. As we all know, red roses represent love. This is the Master's memory. He's not remembering details, but emotions and feelings. It's how I like to think of reading and how I go about reviewing books, considering how they make me feel. That's what makes a book memorable for me, and that's what inspired me to write an essay about bookish experiences. And there's a link there to that essay. The rose petals are significant also, as they are not the roses themselves. They've already been plucked from the rose and have begun to decay. Something precious has been detached from its source. This anticipates the manuscript's burning and the Master's subsequent collapse. That's how I'm seeing it anyway. And the red? It matches the red lining of Pilate's cloak that forms the glue between chapters 1 and 2, taking us from Moscow to Pilate. Pilatism. The Master intimates that an editor published part of his manuscript in the newspaper and proceeded, along with others, to attack the author as an apologist for Jesus Christ. Remember that Soviet Russia was essentially an atheist country by order of the state. Another critic accuses him of Pilatism, and still another calls the author a militant old believer, a reference to the schism in the Russian Orthodox Church in the 17th century. The Master begins his downward spiral. Stage 1, melancholy, the joyless days of autumn. Stage 2, surprise. The authors of those articles weren't saying what they wanted to say, and that was precisely what aroused their fury. Stage 3, fear of the dark. The stage of mental illness began. Remember that these are the words that Pilate used to describe what Yeshua was guilty of. And we'll just mention the octopus here, because that's quite a powerful motif that illustrates the downward spiral, I think, of the Master. He feeds his manuscript and notebooks into the stove to burn them. Quote, "It's terribly hard to do because paper covered in writing burns unwillingly." And then I've included this artwork once again by Christopher Con Askew from the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition, which says "Rukopisi nie goriat," which is manuscripts don't burn. As the book is burning, a yellow colour rose inexorably up the pages, again with the colour yellow to indicate sickness or melancholy. Margarita shows up at this point. Margarita and yellow. Margarita shows up at this point and removes the burning manuscript from the fire. "I'll cure you, I will," she muttered, boring into my shoulders. "You'll rewrite it. Why, oh why, didn't I keep one copy myself?" Margarita believes that the Master's illness is the result of her lying to her husband, and that she'll confess her love for someone else to her husband the following day. Truth and lies again, or reality and fantasy. Two Ivans, remember? The woman says that she'll perish with the Master if that's what it takes, and leaves to return in the morning. And that was the last the Master saw of her. Quote, "And those were her last words in my life." Shh. The sick man suddenly cut himself short and raised a finger. It's a restless, moonlit night tonight. And I've got an image there of the moon outside my house in January 2022, with the moon behind some trees and some clouds. The Master then whispers into Bies Domini's ear, and we get only the beginning of what was said. "A quarter of an hour after she left me, there was a knock on my window." Bulgakov as the Master. By this point, it's difficult not to feel that the novel is turning inward. The Master's story, the writing of the pilot novel, the hostile criticism, the fear, the withdrawal, and finally the burning of the manuscript is not merely fictional tragedy, it is autobiographical. The Master is not a one-to-one portrait of Mikhail Bulgakov, but Bulgakov has poured an enormous amount of experience into him. By the early 1930s, Bulgakov was effectively silenced. His plays were banned or withdrawn, his prose was unpublishable, and he was subjected to sustained ideological attack. The accusations levelled against him were often vague and contradictory. What mattered was not what he had written, but how it might be interpreted. Are you seeing echoes of Pilate here? I sure am. That is also what happened to the Master. He does not describe a single devastating review, but something more corrosive, a campaign. Articles that are not quite saying what they mean. Critics are angrier than the text warrants. Charges that slide from theological error into ideological heresy. Pilatism, chief among them. This is censorship at its most effective, diffuse, deniable and internalised. The most devastating moment, however, is not the criticism, but the response to it. When the Master burns his manuscript, Bulgakov is drawing on personal experience. He himself destroyed drafts of the Master and Margarita during periods of despair, convinced that the work could never exist openly in the world as it was. And the tragedy is that he was right. It wasn't published until after his death. But he was also right with his exclamation that manuscripts don't burn. It didn't burn, and here we are reading it today. Bulgakov's own correspondence from this period echoes the Master's despair with uncomfortable clarity. In a 1929 letter to Maxim Gorky, written at the height of his censorship and professional isolation, Mikhail Bulgakov described a situation that feels painfully close to the Master's fate. Quote, "All my plays have been banned. Not a line of mine is being printed anywhere. I have no work ready." End quote. The complaint is not merely about lost income or wounded pride, but about erasure, the sense of having been rendered invisible as a writer. Read alongside the Master's account of hostile criticism, fear and withdrawal, the burning of the manuscript no longer feels like melodrama. It reads instead as the logical endpoint of sustained pressure, when creation itself begins to feel futile, even dangerous. This is the psychological space from which the Master's act emerges. Burning the manuscript is not liberation, it is fear turned inward. The line, quote, "paper covered in writing burns unwillingly," end quote, is quietly devastating. It suggests that meaning itself resists destruction. Once something truthful has been written, it does not want to die, even when its author wants it gone. This moment also recalls Nikolai Gogol, who famously burned the second part of Dead Souls in a state of spiritual crisis. I don't think we ever got that back though, did we? Bulgakov knew Gogol not just as a precursor, but as a warning. This is where the famous line, "manuscripts don't burn," gains its force. It is not optimism or bravado, it is metaphysical. Even when a text is destroyed physically, it survives in memory, in consciousness and in moral consequence. The Master's novel cannot be erased because it has already entered the world. And Bulgakov is careful not to idealise his alter ego. The Master retreats, he abandons the fight, he internalises fear. In this he mirrors Pilate more than Christ. Both recognise truth, both suffer because of it. Both fail to act decisively when the cost becomes too high. Chapter 14, Praise Be to the Cockerel. Rimsky is in his office after the magic show and is at his wit's end. He hears police whistles from out in the street, so he goes to look out the window. It's chaos. The audience has spilled out of the theatre and the women are all in their underwear. The Parisian clothes that they had scrambled for during the magic show have vanished. Rimsky knows that there will be consequences and intends fully to make some calls and pass the blame onto Likhodiev. but his nerves are shot. Just then the phone rings, giving him a fright. He picks it up to hear, quote, an insinuating and depraved female voice. "Don't phone anyone, Rimsky, or there'll be trouble." He's freaked out and he finds himself looking out the window at the moon through the trees. It's a very tense scene and expertly written by Bulgakov. You can feel Rimsky's fear, which builds and builds until he hears a key in the door. Varyanucha enters. Has he been possessed? The last time we saw him, he had fallen unconscious in Berlioz's flat as Hella was approaching him with a kiss. There's certainly something different about him, and Rimsky is suspicious. Varyanucha explains that Styopa Likhodiev wasn't telegraphing from Yalta, but instead was involved in a prank with a telegraphist from a cafe called Yalta outside of Moscow. Upon hearing this news, Rimsky's eyes, quote, lit up with a nice yellow light, end quote. He imagines Likhodiev's subsequent dismissal with no small amount of glee, which is kind of a nasty thought. Hence the yellow light, I would say. Varyanucha continues his tale of Likhodiev's further crimes, all of which sound far-fetched. A wee translation point. Quote, the man was no bowl of cherries. That's from the Aplin translation. This line jumped out at me as an interesting idiom. Here's how it plays out. The Russian word is padarachek, which is a diminutive of padarak, meaning present or gift. Russians love their diminutives, much as the Scots do, with the particle we, particularly among women when speaking to other women. When I was postmaster at the main post office in my area, one of my employees, a woman, would ask female customers, "Would you like a wee receipt?" It used to make me chuckle and fascinated me from a socio-linguistic point of view. So in the text here, it's literally, in Scots, a wee gift. Let's see what the other translators do with it. So the original reads, "Sto cheloviek etit, nie padarachek." Michael Glennie has it as "the man was a menace." Burgeon and O'Connor, "he was hardly a gift to humanity." Pavin and Volokonsky, "the man was no gift." Karpilson, "the man was no joy to deal with." And Aplin, "the man was no bowl of cherries." I'm not sure what the M dash is for in the Burgeon/O'Connor translation. Which translation do you prefer? Let me know in the comments. And if you have access to the Mira Ginsburg translation, I'd love to know how she rendered it. It soon becomes clear to Rimsky that Varyanucha is spinning a web of lies. He senses the putrid malarial dampness blowing across the floor again, and his fear begins to grow. He notices Varyanucha's bruise on his face and other features that indicate he is not who he once was. In fear, he presses the panic button at his desk. Nothing happens. This does not go unnoticed by Varyanucha, who questions Rimsky about it. It's then that Rimsky notices that Varyanucha is not casting a shadow. Varyanucha realises he's been caught and locks the door to keep Rimsky in the room. Rimsky backs up to the window, quote, flooded with moonlight, end quote, and sees the face of a naked girl pressed up against the glass. Quote, he understood that his end had come. Just as the deceased woman is climbing in the window, a cockerel crows once, twice, thrice. I mean, how biblical can we get? The pilot story is intermingling with the Moscow story, and not only that, but it's bringing the natural back from the supernatural. The dead woman floats away, and Varyanucha collapses to the floor. Rimsky makes his escape, and within a few paragraphs, he's on the express train to Leningrad. And that's where I'll leave things this week. As ever, I'm far more interested in how you experienced these chapters. Did anything strike you as strange, funny, or unsettling? Were there moments that slowed you down, or others that suddenly clicked into place? If you're rereading, I'd love to know what you're seeing differently. If this is your first encounter with the novel, tell me where it surprised you or resisted you. We'll keep following the thread together, slowly, attentively, and without rushing to tidy conclusions. Follow me, reader. So yeah, I'll just add a wee bit here that isn't in the essay to say that for me, this slow read is absolutely incredible. This is at least my third, possibly fourth time reading the novel, and it's got so much in it that I just hadn't picked up on before. So yeah, I'm having a great time with it, and I hope that you're enjoying it as much as I am, and that these analyses are helping you to understand the novel as they are me. So yeah, it's great fun. Maybe I'll get back up the hill of beans. Just looking out the window, it's looking a bit grim today, but I might manage up there, who knows. If I can maybe catch up with the vlogs that I was doing, because I do enjoy that up the hill. There's just so much. Where did I stop? Chapter 7, I think. So yeah, I've got a fair bit to do if I want to catch up there. But if you have been watching those vlogs and you enjoy them and would like me to continue, please let me know, because that would be a good signal for me. For some reason I don't feel like doing it sitting at the desk here. I seem to have split that from this, which is interesting as a content creator to have found that dichotomy in creation. I don't know what it is, but I'm acknowledging it here, and we'll see. Right, so thanks very much for your attention here. I appreciate it very much. And yeah, please share this if you think you know somebody that would enjoy this novel and who hasn't read it. All of this content, although you're following it now as you're reading, it's evergreen. So anybody reading the book could obviously watch this content or read it at any time. So that's quite a good thing, I think. Yeah, I love that. See you later, folks. Za mной, читатель.